Great.
Everybody, this is Raul for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor and pleasure of having none other than the incomparable Leland Sklar coming to us this particular date. This is going to air later, but from Ireland. And
Yeah.
Lee is extraordinarily busy, so I'll start out by saying thank you, Lee, so much for making time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. And I'll get the ball rolling here. For so many people, I know that you are the bass power behind so much of the music that I grew up with and so many people grew up with. It's the soundtracks of our life, and it's not until we look at a discography and see that you've been on over 2,000 records, and that was the last counting, if not more now.
Oh, yeah, that was years ago.
Yeah. So who knows what the number's up to? You know, it's
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm a working musician. That's the most important thing.
And that is really kind of the key as we follow. But I think, as is often the case with the bassist, a lot of people didn't realize you were there, didn't know you were there, because you were kind of back in the back, off to the corner. And it's not until they look closely they go, wow, Lee played, he was here. Oh, he was here too. As a matter of fact, I reflect back, there was a handful of James Taylor concerts that I've been to in the past that you were probably there, and I was probably there, and who knew? It was just like, I'm
kind of, I guess, like the Zelig of bass.
There you go. There you go. So for a lot of people who don't know you, let's kind of take a step back and go from the start. I know you're originally from Wisconsin?
Milwaukee. Yeah, Milwaukee.
But call Southern California more home than...
My family moved to LA when I was about 4 years old.
Gotcha.
So, my ties to Wisconsin are pretty minimal. I do have some memories and a box of photographs of me in snowsuits, but other than that, it's pretty much LA was my whole upbringing.
Gotcha. And like many bass musicians, my understanding is you didn't start on bass particularly. You started with piano?
Yeah. My parents, we had a piano in the house, even though my mom played a little piano. My dad didn't. He noodled around with saxophone.
Okay.
But when I was a kid, they would watch the Liberace TV show. And as a little kid, I would watch this, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. This guy sitting there in his tuxedo with his candelabra and his big rings on. It was before he turned into the showbiz spectacle that he became. And his brother George would come out and play violin with him. And I thought this was cool, and I used to, after the show, I'd go over and start noodling around on the piano, and I had an affinity for it, so I started studying piano. I was about 5 or 6 years old at that point. And I studied classical. I mean, that was my whole upbringing, was classical. And when I was 12 years old, I went into junior high school and assumed I would be the piano player. And the music teacher, Mr. Ted Lynn, said, look, we've got a ton of kids that play piano, but we need somebody to play a string bass. And they pulled an old K upright out of the back room that was a blonde, beautiful. I wish I had that bass now. It's a great little bass. And he gave me some rudiments on it, just showed me kind of. But when I put the bass against me and plucked my first note and felt the vibration running through it, I just thought, I like this. This is good. This is really good. So I kind of left piano behind at that point and focused on bass. And I've been on that journey ever since. It's amazing how your life just turns like that.
And from an upright, the transition to electric, did that come out of the kind of music?
It came out of necessity.
Gotcha.
Out of absolute necessity. I started joining bands. I was into it, and I was joining all kinds of bands, trying to be heard above drums and guitar amps and stuff. There was no good stuff for a bass. I mean, if you were lucky, you could get your hands on a mic and stick it out in front of the bass, but it still didn't quite cover it. So one day my father took me down to Stein on Vine, which originally was a little shop underneath the Musicians Union on Vine Street. and we bought a melody bass and a St. George amplifier. And I sat home and just got used to, in my head, wrapping my head around going from this to this. Mm-hmm. And it was really wonderful for me because it gave me a chance to be competitive within the band and not just be bleeding at the end of the night and people going, "What were you doing up there?" You know, because they couldn't hear anything. I miss upright. I still have an upright at home, but I went for years without getting any calls on upright. And it's not like just riding a bicycle. You don't just hop back on the seat and suddenly you're, you know, Edgar Meyer. So I kind of relinquished that. I can bullshit my way through it if I have to do it. Gotcha. But I have too many friends that are fabulous upright players. Dominic Genova in LA and back, you know, there's a ton of guys out there that's all they do is, man, they eat and sleep upright. So I always put the call out to them. When Patitucci used to live in LA, I would say, "Oh, call John. He's great," or Chuck DeMonico or any of those guys. So I've pretty much just geared myself back into the electric world. And there's enough work with that where I don't have regrets about it. I miss bowing. I don't miss pits as much as I miss bowing.
Gotcha. Now, like many musicians, my understanding was that you were kind of in search of the perfect instrument for a while, and this was what brought forward the Frankenstein bass?
A little bit. Actually, one of the best instruments I ever had, I still have at home. I managed to screw it up. I just posted a picture of it actually on Facebook. I came to a choice where I was offered a Gibson. It was a Gibson, it wasn't the violin bass, it was a Gibson Melody Maker bass that had the banjo pegs in the back of the head, kind of like the violin basses had. I was either going to be able to buy that or a 62 jazz bass, and either one of them was going to be $90, and all I had was $90, and I had to make a choice. So I went with the Fender. This was around 66, I think. And it was a perfect candy apple red Fender with all the plates and the felt mutes and all that. Well, being a schmuck that I was back in college, I was bored one night and I took out a hacksaw and sawed off the horn, reshaped the lower horn, carved peace and love and all kinds of crap on it, decoupage, a picture of Zappa on the back of it. Mm-hmm. And that's the bass I played on Spectrum. I played that on all early James and Jackson Browne records and all. So that was my main studio bass for the first few years. Then I managed to come upon a 62 Precision neck, and it just felt great. It's something about it, but don't like precision. I really like a jazz profile. So Charvel had just started in business, and I went out to their place in San Dimas and took a piece of wire and hung about a dozen blank P bass bodies, alder bodies up, and just tapped them. And one of them just went boom, had a beautiful resonance. So the watering hole for all of the players back at that time was Westwood Music in LA, and John Carruthers ran the repair department. So I brought in that body, and I brought in this precision neck, and I brought in my old jazz bass, and we took a template off the jazz neck, and he reshaped the precision neck into a jazz neck. Then, in doing so, he had to strip the frets out of the bass. So I was walking around the shop looking at fret wire there while he was shaping the neck, and I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Oh, that's mandolin wire." I said, "Let's try that." And he said, "Oh, no, not for bass. That won't work." I said, "Look, let's try it. If it doesn't work, then I'll pay you for a second fret job, and we'll just tear it out." So he fretted it with mandolin wire, which ended up being the coolest thing I've ever done. And every single bass I have has mandolin wire in it. It's almost like playing fretless, but you can do all your chordal stuff, and it's just beautiful. Now I had a blank alder body, which was a P body, so you had the spot in the middle where the precision pickup would normally have gone. But we wanted to put two sets of pickups on it, so I got involved with Rob at EMG when EMG first started, when they used to have EMG embossed across the top of their pickup. And we decided to put two sets of precision pickups where the jazz pickups would have normally gone. But I was thinking that by the nature of the E and the A string, why wouldn't you put that half of the pickup closer to the bridge? And because the G and the D are going to read better by their gauge. Mm-hmm. And so we, instead of this, we reversed them so that the part closer to me was the closest to the bridge. And when we plugged that bass in, it became so even. It was, and it's one of those things, it was a crapshoot. Yeah. It could have been great. It's got the first Hipshot detuner on it, which I still think is one of the greatest devices for bass possible. But, it could have been a piece of junk, but I plugged it in and I just went, my God. And John went, my God. And that became my main studio bass for all these years. And it's still kind of my primary go-to bass when I'm in the studio. I bring a few basses with me. I bring my Dingwall and I bring my Warwick, and if I need some other stuff, and I know in advance, like a Hofner or something, I'll bring it. But I would say 90% of everything I've done has been on that. And I called it Frankenstein because it was like going out and digging up body parts. There was no actual bass ever there. It was just that.
And it's interesting because we run into a huge amount of gear acquisition syndrome, and especially on Facebook, if I put out the call, show me your bass, I'll get a picture of some guy's couch with 20 basses on it, and it's kind of like, so you haven't found the one you really liked quite yet, I'm guessing, because you've got so many.
Some guys just love collecting. I was really lucky because one of the worst basses I ever owned, and I hate to say it, but it was an Alembic. I bought one early on, and it just did not work for me. And I was so lucky that John Entwistle was a collector because he bought it from me. Nice. So I didn't lose any money. But all he wanted was a beautiful bass to hang on the wall with his hundreds of basses that he had. And it was gorgeous. It was a coffee table, Coca-Cola and Zebra and all these exotic woods. But it didn't sound half as good as my old jazz bass. So I was lucky. But I've never been a gearhead. I don't really collect basses. I try to just hold on to that which I can use, because I think it's kind of unfair to the instrument to be shelved and stuffed in a closet. And I have a lot of friends who have kids that were starting bass, and I would end up giving them basses. Nice. And just say, look, it'd be nicer for you to start on something good than start on a piece of crap that might disappoint you and not make you excited. And my only criteria was, if you decide you don't want to do it anymore, I want the bass back, and I'll pass it on to somebody else. And I've done that about a half a dozen times now.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, and I believe, especially with wood, a lot of these get better even with age. So
yeah, absolutely.
It was something that I was talking with my wife about when we were discussing Stradivarius violins. When they started making them, I'm sure they didn't set out to go, oh, this is going to be the very best violin in the whole world. It's just as time has gone by and the wood has aged. And I've got a 40-year-old Mexican dreadnought acoustic guitar that is superb. Sadly, is the case when you're actually using your instruments, it got broke. It got dropped on one tour and cracked all the way around, and has been glued together and patched up, but is still just amazing when it comes to the sound and the feel of it,
Look at Willie Nelson's guitar.
With a hole in it. I know. It was
Yeah, he picks it up, and it's wonderful. It's just, it's Willie. It defines Willie. I think, I stopped carrying the Frankenstein on the road just for that reason, though, because what you're dealing with airlines now, security at gigs and all that. So I tend not to take something that is irreplaceable. Like when I'm using my Starbase on the road, my Warwick Starbase is a totally stock Warwick Starbase. Mm-hmm. So I could go into a music store if they had one in stock and get one, and it would be exactly what I'm already playing. The only difference would be is I had them swap out for Mando frets.
Exactly.
And the same pretty much with my Dingwall basses. I did a signature model for them, which has a few tweaks, but their standard model is also so good that if I was caught in a rut, I could track one down. But I've got a couple of basses at home that I absolutely love to play that I picked up at flea markets for like $75. So to me, money doesn't equate to the quality. I mean, it's nice to get exotic woods and all that. But you know, I just saw a video on Facebook of a guy who's playing unbelievable slide guitar on a shovel. Made the shovel into a slide, man.
Sure.
And it sounds like Bonnie playing. Yeah, so it's gear's one thing, you know. I mean, it's good to have decent gear, but
Sure.
you know, but your gear really is there, there, and there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, and I worked with a guy. He used to say that good carpenters don't need a lot of tools, and so you know, you think back to the old days. Somebody show up with a little box with a few tools, and they did amazing things. So
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's kind of the same concept. Now,
Well, I finished a lot of jobs using a crescent wrench as a hammer.
you use what you got to use, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
exactly.
it'll get you by. Now, we've talked about instruments. Let's talk a little bit about music because you've played on so many things. What is the music of your passion? Because I know you've stepped up and done the job, but what do you like the most? What do you enjoy?
I'm pretty eclectic in my taste. Like when we're on the tour buses driving, sometimes I just climb in my bunk and I listen to nothing but classical music. I love Ralph Vaughan Williams. I love Aaron Copland. I listen to Mozart and Chopin. I love Hendrix and ZZ Top and everything out of that ilk, early Cream and John Mayall. I was a huge fan of like Vanilla Fudge and bands like that, or Moby Grape out of the Bay Area. And then I try to listen to as many contemporary bands as I can and just see what's going on there. It's a different world now, and sometimes I find artists who I really like, but I'm just not comfortable with the production. There's too much machine, there's too much quantizing, and I'm thinking, God, if this person had cut in the old days, this would be so much more soulful because they wouldn't be strapped down to click track and, you know, one instrument at a time being used on their records. But I'm pretty eclectic. I really like to listen to everything. It's like when people ask me about what bass players do I like.
Mm-hmm.
How do you answer that? You know, I mean, there's like I can glean something from almost any person that picks up a bass and does something, from a beginner to Jocko. You know, I watch them play and I go, oh man, what a cool idea. Because I'm one cat and I play, but I haven't thought of everything. I've got my little niche that I've kind of cultivated that I do get to step out of. I mean, I still have people come up to me going, man, Spectrum's one of my favorite records. Do you know who played bass on that? Me.
Geez.
Oh,
yeah.
So it's kind of funny, you know. I've been pretty much a chameleon though my whole life. Like this year, I'm touring with Judith Owen, who is amazing, gifted artist, Welsh singer songwriter.
Okay.
And every time one of her legs would stop, I would be back out with Toto doing their tour. Then I'd go back with Judith, then I'd go back with Toto. And next year I have Judith and trying to work Toto in because we're starting Phil Collins again.
Nice.
So, you know, it's like I feel like a plate spinner on the old Ed Sullivan show. Got them all going and trying to keep them all up in the air at one time. Plus, I've got some album projects in the book that I'm going to have to do when I get back. So I'm going to say it's a first world problem.
Gotcha.
There's so much going on in the world that's so terrible and so negative that, you know, I feel so completely fortunate that I get to hang with fabulous musicians, get to play wonderful music, and I travel and see the world. And the hardest part of it is just explaining a kind of America at this point to everybody overseas. And I don't even want to get into the politics of things now, but it's a very strangely kind of grotesque, embarrassing time to be out on the road and trying to justify what people see from overseas. It's pretty weird, but having a great time.
I hear you.
Absolutely fabulous time.
Well, and it's interesting because since I have an opportunity to talk to bassists worldwide, we kind of come back to the commonality of having the shared passion for the instrument, and that transcends the political. So when I was chatting with Richard Bona, and he was mentioning, he's like, couldn't the politicians just learn from the musicians that we could get along and we could share in the commonality.
Absolutely, absolutely. When that last time I toured with Phil Collins, we did a gig in Jerusalem and then went from Jerusalem to Beirut. Crowds were exactly the same, and the coolest thing in Beirut was they showed us a photograph the next day and said this gig was one of the great coups because the leader of Lebanon and his arch rival, they apparently just hate each other's guts. They and their wives were sitting front row center at the gig, and they were all holding hands and going back and forth like this. And we just went, why can't it be like this? Why can't it? I mean, music is really, I've played music with artists from all over the world, and with many of them, we have no language skills with each other. Totally. As soon as we start playing, boom, just this happens, you know, and we work nuances into what they want to do. But it truly is, music is one of the greatest gifts of the arts, I would say, are one of the greatest gifts of humanity. And when it's in its purest forms, there's nothing better. Politics is just business. It's companies that want to make billions of dollars, and then they start, you know, kind of gearing people against each other and creating adversity and animosity and all this. And they walk away kind of laughing as they see everybody eating their young. There was a great episode of The Twilight Zone called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. And two aliens sat up on a hill, and all they did was turn all the power off in a neighborhood, and everybody came out and was going, what's going on? And then slowly they would turn one person's lights on and then start somebody else's car. And then they all think it's this person's like a demon from space. And they say, and then it ends up with the aliens going, well, we don't have to do anything except turn a few things on and off. And the people are down there shooting at each other and going crazy. Yeah. It's kind of the world in a microcosm, what we're seeing. And it saddens me, but we go to these gigs and I see people for a couple hours having the best time and the most wonderful day. And I go, thank you. Thank you. This is what it's all about.
Totally. Well, and for some of our younger readers and viewers, you'll catch you'll get some references here that you might go, what's the Ed Sullivan Show? And what's the Twilight Zone? Google it. And the reruns are on Netflix or something. I mean, you know, I'm sure you can see it. Amazingly, my grandma made me go to bed when the Twilight Zone came on. She didn't want me to have nightmares, and so I'd sneak little views of some of them, and they were just creepy as all get out and scary. But
brilliant. Rod Serling was such a magnificent writer, and it changed television. And then you watch those old shows, and you'll see all the stars now when they were really young. They all did those shows, and there were so many from that period. But I think one of the greatest things in the world from the internet is Google. I sit there on YouTube, and I just pull up all these old shows I remember as a kid and just watch them. And just, you know, I'm not nostalgic in somebody that just talks about the good old days, because I've kind of tried to have a personal mantra for myself of don't become an old fart. You know, you don't want to be sitting there with grandpa who's always talking about, well, when I was a kid, you know, like I go in the studio, when I'm working, I still work with tons of players that are like in their 20s. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be turning 70, you know, so there's kind of a chasm there. So I don't sit there and I talk about, man, well, when we used to be cutting analog compared to this digital, I would never say it because I just sound like an out-of-touch old fart. Yeah. But if I'm in the studio with young guys and they go, can you tell us about what it was like cutting analog? Man, I am all over it. Mm-hmm. I want to share experiences, but I don't want to pretend like now is negated because the old days were better. Because there's great music being recorded now. The hardest part of the music business at this point is what do you do with it after you've made it in terms of recorded it? Sure. Because you don't have the labels for the most part. You don't have that machine, that new distribution and all. And everybody hated the labels because you knew you were going to get burned by them. But your music actually got heard and it got out there. Yeah. Now I work on great records and then I get calls from the artist like a week later going, any idea who I could talk to about this or who we should be playing this for? Do you know any managers? And it's kind of like the cart before the horse.
Gotcha.
It's a tough time, but you don't want to discourage people because there is a lot of gifted artists out there. I hear people, and then I watch on Facebook, you see some like 11-year-old young bass player or a 5-year-old female drummer who you're going, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Can I just be their roadie?
Yeah.
They're so good. So there's so much talent. It's just we're in a business that's going through some serious growing pains and needs to find its way at this point. I'm looking over, double checking the time here, so we're still good here.
Great. Well, and because of your years in the business, I think something that we would certainly want to get. What advice would you give young musicians to be successful at doing what has worked for you?
Well, see, what has worked for me doesn't exist anymore. That world really is gone as far as I'm concerned. I think it's the young musicians that are going to have to be on this voyage of discovery and figure out how to get stuff out there. Because for me, everything I did was all about going to clubs and sitting in and playing and meeting people. It's all contacts and meeting people, being in the right place at the right time. Well, there's not many clubs anymore that you can just walk in with a bass over your shoulders and ask guys, can I sit in with you guys? Sure. I used to go sit in the Experience in Hollywood, and The Who would come in, Jimi Hendrix would come in, and you'd be sitting there watching these guys, and then they'd say, oh, you got a bass, why don't you come up and play something with us? And this was in the late 60s, and I made, a lot of contacts. What people can do at this point is really hard. To me, the only thing I can instill is the same thing that I had, is passion. Just love what you do, play the bass, play as much as you can. If you ever think you want to be a studio musician or try to get into it, learn how to read, be a proficient reader. Learn, if you were going to go to Nashville, learn how to read the Nashville number system as compared to chord charts or notation charts. I was fortunate. I started as a pianist, so I was able to read treble, tenor, bass clef, and all that by the time I was playing bass. But it's really the passion. You don't go into this to think that you're going to win awards, you're going to have a big BMW, you're going to make lots of money, and the chicks are going to dig you. If that happens for you, great. But man, if that's your motivation for doing it, you're not going to happen. It's not going to work for you. There's way too much out there of people, but that have that same dream but have a different dedication. Your dedication has to be absolutely to the music, and you don't have to learn every kind of music. If you're a guy that just likes reggae, or you're a rave guy, or if you're like a death metal guy, then just focus on that if that's what makes you happy and that's what you want to do. You don't have to be out playing country if you really want to be a metal player. Sure. If you can listen to it all, though, and glean something from a little bit of everything, it'll make you a more well-rounded sounding musician. And I think that's all I can do is encourage, is just have passion and love for what you're doing, and keep an eye open for alternatives. I've done a ton of records over the years with guys who I'd go in the studio and we'd finish a great album, and I'd say, so what do you normally do? And the guy would say, well, I own a medical supply company, or I'm an orthopedic surgeon, or I own Skechers shoes. Sure. It's things like that. Guys who have found other careers, but that's freed them to play the music they really want to play. And some of them are as good as any cat that's out there. It's just they found this other thing that made them, they were good business guys on top of it. So just do it, everything you can. Time's short. I mean, like I say, I'm sitting here, getting ready to turn 70, yet I can still remember my first session, and it feels like yesterday, and it's just shocking to realize how fast this time has gone by. I mean, basically a little over 50 years went like that. And I know it's packed with lots of stuff, but when you really sit and think about it, you go, Jesus, already? Here? And you start seeing all your friends dropping. And it's scary. It's scary. It's a little scary. I'm not afraid of death, but it's kind of scary to think that there'll be a time when you can't do this anymore. And that's, to me, this is one of the elixirs of life. This is, my music is as much a part of me as the blood in my veins. So don't want to lose that.
Gotcha. Now, as busy as you are, I'm just kind of trying to look ahead, because you mentioned, do you have a project or something that you want to do in the future? Because I know you've got your plans kind of immediately laid out, but anything particular?
Well, there's some interesting things going on. Like next year, I'll be back out with Judith, Phil Collins starts touring again next year, and I'm trying to figure out if I can still do Toto and all of that. But something's come around the corner that we're starting to lay the groundwork for. There's been some serious interest in us reforming the section. And Russ and Craig and Danny and I have been talking about this very seriously, and there's a few things coming up that we might be able to use as launching pads for this. I would love it. I loved playing with those guys, and we have so much history, and it's been so long. But on the tour I'm on right now, Russ was out with us. Russ went back to Vancouver. He went home, but we're out here with a fabulous percussionist named Pedro Segundo. Okay. But that's kind of really intriguing. And then there's always some kind of stuff, but I don't have like a grand scheme. Like every time a gig ends as a musician, and know that this never changes. The minute a gig ends, you get paranoid and you think you're unemployed and you're never going to get called again. So I'm thrilled when the phone rings. I just jump on it and I go, I'm out of here. I got a call. I go to work. That's pretty much it. I'm still a grunt player. I'm the plumber you call to come over and fix the pipes.
Gotcha. Well, yeah. Lee, I know you've taken this little chunk out of your time. We're ever so grateful for you sharing this insight into your journey as it is. And again, I can't tell you how inspiring it has been for, I'm sure, generations of bassists. I can't tell you how much of James Taylor I've lifted that you were playing.
Fine, it's all there, public domain.
I know, but it's like, this is fabulous. And as I was saying, it's been the music that has surrounded the events in our lives that is kind of like the little tabs on the top of folders that you go, Berkeley, 1970 something, Fire and Rain. Pick a tune.
It does it to me too.
Yeah. So we're so grateful that that you're doing what you're doing.
Well, I'll tell you also, I'm happy if you ever want. I'm happy to come back and do this again with you anytime. We can work now that we got our Skype set up here. You send me an email if you say, hey, can you talk for a half hour, an hour, whatever you want to do, and we can archive stuff, do whatever you want to do. It'd be fine with me. And hopefully I'll see you at the NAMM show.
Oh, for sure. Well, on that,
I'm going to be limited this year. I thought I was going to be there all 4 days, and I'm not sure because Judith starts her tour then, but I'm going to try to eke it out because I have a new signature model Warwick bass.
Oh, excellent.
Based on the Star bass. Nice. That we're going to introduce at this show. So I would like to be there at least a day to do some photos with them while they showed off. But I think it's going to be really bitchin'.
Oh, that's great. Well, we'll have to look forward to it. And, of course, we'll keep an eye out for you. As for those that don't go to the NAMM show, because it is an industry kind of closed show, it is at least 4 days of absolute madness and chaos. And it is possible for both of us to be in the exact same place and not see each other because there's 100,000 people there. So
you can miss it. But tell everybody that I'll leave a brick in the back door. So if they want to sneak in, just come on down.
There you go. Well, again, thank you, Lee. Folks, you've seen this here on Bass Musician Magazine.
My pleasure.